quarantine plans confirmed.
Arrivals must self-isolate for 14 days. This is the incubation period of coronavirus.
Universities go virtual.
What would traditionally have been lectures delivered in large lecture theatres to a large number of students. So we are planning to deliver these digitally.
And how to ease your pets out of lockdown. This is Coronavirus, the latest from the Telegraph. I'm Theodora Louloudis. Plans to force almost all arrivals into the UK to self-isolate for 2 weeks have been confirmed by the Home Secretary. From June the 8th, all international arrivals will be required to fill in a form with their contact details and the location of where they'll isolate in a bid to stop new infections entering the country. Those flouting the rules in England could be fined up to £1,000 or face prosecution. Some key workers will be exempt. Tory backbenchers, including former ministers Liam Fox and Theresa Villiers, questioned both the timing and the approach of the new measures, but the Home Secretary batted off criticism of the plans, saying now was the most effective time to put them in place.
Some have suggested that public health measures at the border should have been introduced when the virus was at its peak. However, at that time, the scientific advice was clear that such measures would have made little difference when domestic transmission was widespread. But now the transmission rate in the United Kingdom continues to decline and international travel is likely to resume from its record low. Therefore, the scientific advice is that imported cases of the virus pose a more significant threat to our national effort and our recovery.
The moves prompted anger from many travel businesses keen to return to some sense of normality, with Ryanair branding the plan idiotic. Ben Ross is the Telegraph's deputy head of travel.
Given the criticism the government has had over inconsistencies in this great unlockdown, it's perhaps significant that Priti Patel didn't really deviate from the heavily trailed script about the UK's plans for quarantine restrictions, even in the face of huge industry pressure for a government rethink. The 14-day quarantine rules, with all those fines and all those forms, and which start next Monday, come after more than 200 tourist and aviation business chiefs signed a petition warning that quarantine will devastate the £200 billion industry that accounts for 4 million jobs in the UK. These are the tour operators, travel agents and airports that until the arrival of COVID-19 were sending us on holiday year in and year out. In many ways, this is the same big balancing act that's appearing elsewhere in society. What harm could potentially be done to our health by not implementing measures against what harm is being done to the economy? The industry feels that this is a case of shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted, with infections higher in the UK than in many parts of Europe. The Home Secretary says that with the infection rate lowering, now is the time to introduce these measures to maintain that downwards momentum. What does it mean for those travel firms? More uncertainty. The first review of these measures will be June the 28th. But remember, the FCO currently has what amounts to a blanket travel ban in place anyway. So for most of us, the quarantine imposition is almost irrelevant. We can't travel abroad in the first place. The chink of hope is that the Home Secretary isn't ruling out bilateral agreements, these so-called air bridges between specific countries, as part of the ongoing process of opening things up. And this all comes at the point just when there's an increased sense of optimism around Europe. In Italy, foreign tourism resumed today. Portugal and Greece have said they will welcome holidaymakers from the UK when we can travel again. And I, for one, can't wait.
Boris Johnson's promised all coronavirus tests will be turned around within 24 hours by the end of the month, as he faced the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, in the House of Commons. When MPs on the Health and Social Care Committee later asked the head of the government's test and trace programme, Dido Harding, how many tests were carried out within 24 hours, she was accused of not knowing the numbers behind her own programme after she refused to give a definitive answer, a response that left members of the committee frustrated, not least its chair, Conservative MP Jeremy Hunt.
Well, I think we discovered one very important piece of information, which was actually from the person on before Dido Harding, Professor Christoph Fraser from Oxford University. And he said basically that there's a 48-hour window from when someone has symptoms to when their contacts will start spreading the disease. And what that means is you've got to do the test within 24 hours. And then in the next 24 hours, you can then contact all their close contacts and tell them to self-isolate. And that's the way you stop the disease in its tracks. And that's what happens in Taiwan and Korea. And what was very frustrating was that, the government and Dido Harding are not prepared to tell us how many tests are done within 24 hours. They say it will not help public confidence in the new system if they give us that data. But it's so important. So they have promised they will get back to us with that data.
It adds to confusion already present over the government's testing figures. The government was up until recently producing numbers on people tested, but it recently admitted those figures might not be accurate and will have to be revised. Following a difficult fortnight with criticism over several aspects of its handling of the pandemic, the Telegraph revealed how Boris Johnson's looking to take direct control of the handling of the crisis. Our chief political correspondent, Christopher Hope, explains.
Boris Johnson taking back control. It's all a bit 2016, isn't it? But what's going on here is Boris Johnson is keen to take direct control of the levers of power in number 10 Downing Street. So he'll be chairing a new strategy committee called CS, and Michael Gove will chair a new operations committee called CO. And these replace 4 ministerial groups plus the morning COVID-19 committee meeting. It's all very Whitehall, all very Beltway, all very Westminster, but it matters because the PM is getting stronger as he recovers from that dreadful bout of the coronavirus back in April. And this hopefully might give him a control and to demonstrate to elected MPs that he is now in control of how the response is being directed after a difficult few weeks with the Dominic Cummings journey to County Durham, problems with test and trace, and of course the ongoing issue with the quarantine on new arrivals to the UK. But let's see if it works.
University, a time for mixing, meeting new people, and hopefully a carefree existence. Not so, perhaps, for the class of 2023, whose university experience started to take shape today as Universities UK unveiled a series of proposals for easing the lockdown safely. It'll see students living and working in bubbles with peers from their course, virtual Freshers' Week, and one-way systems on campus. The organisation, made up of university vice-chancellors, says universities will offer a blended education, combining online courses and small face-to-face tutorials. Universities can still charge full fees for a very different experience. Earlier, I spoke to the chair of Universities UK and Vice-Chancellor at Brunel University, Professor Julia Buckingham, and I started by asking her whether this was fair.
Well, I will be the first to say, yes, it is a different experience if the whole thing were going to be virtual. But virtual learning has been very much part of university education for a long time. Many universities now routinely record their lectures. They do, of course, do them face-to-face as well. But students actually really value those recorded lectures. They listen to them several times over, and they always say in feedback how it really helps them to develop a really good understanding of the subject. And there is a huge value in being able to go over things that perhaps they didn't quite get the first time round. But there are many, many other ways of doing virtual education aside from lectures. There are wonderful opportunities for truly interactive learning, and I think that's very, very important. Things like simulation, virtual reality. The learning opportunities are huge.
Professor Buckingham, are universities giving students the flexibility that they need in terms of deferring places? This new system, it focuses necessarily on safety, but it might not be for everyone.
Students have every opportunity to defer if they wish to defer. The decision to come to university or not to come to university is the students. If I were in their position, I would go. And I say that for two reasons. Firstly, at Universities UK, we did a survey earlier this year where we asked students, prospective students and current students, about why they wanted to go to university. And the vast majority of them said it was because they were interested in the subject that they want to study. And that subject is still there. The opportunity to challenge it and have a high-quality education is certainly still there, and the emphasis on quality is very, very high.
As many of us prepare to head back to work, there's one family member who may not be anticipating the change. Certainly my own dog has become very used to having me around and available for affection on demand. And research from Insurers Pet Plan has found that more than half of the UK's pets aren't ready for the lockdown to end, though quite how they calculated that is beyond me. Either way, to give us a better sense of how we can help our furry friends with a return to their old routine, I gave the Telegraph's resident vet, Pete Wedderburn, a call.
The simplest thing to do is to understand that dogs and cats don't like sudden big changes. It makes it much easier for them if we can create subtle incremental changes. Instead of you suddenly changing your behavior and being out of the house for 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 hours, start off with no more than like 5 minutes. Get your dog and your cat used to you being somewhere else for 5 minutes. The next day, go to 10 minutes. The next day to 15 minutes. And that way you can be sure that they will gradually get used to how it's going to be again. The other side of socialization that presents a challenge is the fact that dogs especially have got used to just being with us, and they've got out of the habit of being around other dogs. When they see dogs when they're out on walks again, they will get quite upset, and that's just a natural thing. The way around that is if you see another animal approaching on the horizon, well, then what you should do is you should focus on your own dog. Maybe tell them to sit and stay for a moment and to look you in the eye, maybe for 10 or 15 seconds, then give them a treat. So that means generally keeping them quite a long way away at first and only allowing other animals to come closer when they've got used to sitting there and ignoring everything else that's going on around them. Now, I do know it's difficult enough to engineer such situations. If you're in a busy park, well, what can you do? But that's the general principle, and perhaps you can manipulate things by going out at different times of day when it's quieter, avoiding the peak times when there's lots of dogs around, that kind of a thing.
Pete writes a weekly column for The Telegraph on everything from whether your dog can spread coronavirus to how you can put your fat cat on a diet. I'll link to that in the episode description. This is Coronavirus, the latest from The Telegraph. I'm Theodora Louloudis, and I'll have your next update on Thursday evening. In the meantime, listeners can get 30 days free access to all of our coronavirus coverage, as well as our opinion pieces, our culture section, sport, business, and much, much more at telegraph.co.uk/audio. If you have a question you'd like us to cover on the show, email me. The address is coronaviruspodcast@telegraph.co.uk.